All right. Good evening, everyone. We're doing talking about New York City high school admissions exams. We got a lovely guest speaker here, Maruice Frumkin, who I've been happy to work with before. And we'll be talking about all kinds of things relating to New York City, the different kinds of tests, different kinds of admission things. There's a lovely little poll in there if you wouldn't mind just saying hello with that and giving us some information. And yeah, we can see the room starting to fill up, so that's great. All right, and so as always with Appleworth, why we do things, we change students' self-beliefs, change their lives, and the kind of stuff we do academic tutoring, including at middle school and high school levels. We do test prep, and that's going to be a lot of what we're talking about today, understanding the alphabet soup of New York City admissions. And we also do executive function coaching, which is kind of the more kind of behind the scenes of helping students with time management, with organization, and it all falls into sort of like we call executive function coaching. But today we'll be mostly talking about these tests and stuff. Maurice, I'll let you introduce yourself here and go through your lovely CV.
Oh, thanks, Matt. It's a pleasure to be here with Appleworth and you. Thanks for having me back. My background is both with the Department of Education, now known as New York City Public Schools, where I worked on the team that runs the high school admissions process. Prior to that, I had been in the independent school world as an admissions officer. And about 10 plus years ago, went off on my own. I now have a small team of admissions counselors, and we work with families all across the city and beyond on everything from pre-K all the way up through college admissions. So really honored to be here with Matt tonight.
All right. And I'm Matt. I've been with 13 almost 14 years here with Appleworth. And I work on I'm a instructional designer and author. I write a lot of the books and tests and stuff in the back end on the curriculum department. I People have requested, I do well with tutoring and made some things, and I'm kind of our resident expert for all these sort of the middle school, high school admissions tests. So I'm happy to speak on all the complexities of that kind of stuff. Where Maurice I think understands the intricacies of getting those applications done and knowing your audience for those things. So hopefully be a good tag team tonight. So we're gonna talk about these top 5 things, and we got we got a little spoiler here, but we got we'll talk about all these tests and how they're used, building smart testing and application timelines, how to be strategic about these tests, and if especially for a student who needs to prep for more than one test, about trying to maximize the content on there, and then we'll talk about how to improve one's application behind it, and then things about having more than one option on there. So should be good. All right, so we'll jump right in there. So we're going to go into acronym land here, and make sure we understand the tests that are most important for families of eighth graders in New York City. And so obviously starting with the SHSAT, which is the one that is unique for that, and then we'll get into ones that have a wider range of SSAT, ISEE that are taken nationwide, and then we'll talk about the two Catholic school tests there. All right, Reese, want to talk about how SHSAT is used for these schools?
Absolutely. So one of the things that makes the SHSAT unique is that it is the sole criterion by which students are considered for the 8 specialized testing schools, or what a lot of people call the SHSAT schools. So for students that are around this time, particularly 7th grade students that are starting to become interested, or maybe already really interested in one or more of these 8 schools that are listed at the top of the page, the test is how you're considered for those schools. And there are only 3 ways to be considered. One is by your test score. The other is by the schools that you choose when you register in the fall of 8th grade. And the third is just by the number of seats that are offered, the number of offers that are made to each of those schools. So for those 8 schools, that's kind of sort of what sets them apart from the main application for all the other public schools in New York City. LaGuardia is the 9th specialized high school. which is also separate from what we call the main application because it's the 9th specialized high school, but it's not based on the SHSAT, it's based on the auditions. So if you're starting out this process, a great first step, I think, is to start to familiarize yourself a little bit with these schools and what they have to offer, and if and how they represent a good fit for your student.
Sure. And so we've got a slide here to tell you how to get registered on there.
Yeah, so what happens is in the fall of 8th grade, when families have access to the DOE application system, which is called the My School system, one of the first things you do within the first few weeks of logging into that system, and usually that happens around late September, early October, is register for the specialized high schools. Because again, you apply to those schools, the specialized high schools, separate from all the other main application schools. So one of the actual first deadlines that you face as an 8th grade applicant is the deadline to register for the SHSAT. So the DOE usually gives you a few weeks. It's not first come, first serve, as long as you register before the deadline. But during that registration process, as I said a moment ago, you also choose the SHSAT schools that you're interested in, you rank them. And then what happens is in the spring of 8th grade, as a matter of fact, next Thursday for current 8th grade students, they're going to find out all of their public results. So at the same time, simultaneously, you get your SHSAT result, you get your main application result. If you apply to LaGuardia, you get those. It all comes at the same time. And for students that get multiple offers, the DOE gives you time to choose. For most public school students across the city, you take the test at your school. I know Matt's going to talk more about that in a few moments. For students who are not in a public school that ends in 8th grade, so public schools that continue to high school, or for non-public school students, independent school students, parochial school students, they normally test on a weekend in the fall at a central DOE location. I talked really briefly about how offers are made. So it's based on those 3 criteria: test score, number of offers, and schools that you chose. And I think, especially at this time of year when I'm talking to a lot of 7th grade families, one of the things that I emphasize to them is that, number one, these schools aren't for everybody. And number two, it's a very selective admissions process. So as we say with not just the specialized high schools, but for a lot of different kinds of schools that you might be considering, it's good to not put all your eggs in one basket. This is a very selective process. So typically when I'm working with families this time of year, I will discuss strategically how to cast the widest net possible. And sometimes that means applying to different kinds of schools to give yourself as many options as possible. This time of year when results are coming out for 8th grade families, it's a really nice place to be where you have more than one viable option. So again, just to sum up, for this particular test in these 8 schools, all that matters is your score on the test, the schools that you chose, and the number of offers. And this is one of the reasons why it's such a high stakes test, and students can feel pressure because it's really all about this. It has nothing to do with your grades. It has nothing to do with your attendance. It has nothing to do with any other test that you take in middle school.
Yeah, good points for sure. And we'll talk about some of the test anxiety a little bit later, because I think it is for very high stakes for, especially for students that age, 13, 14, to, the taking something once can really, dramatically affect your life one way or the other. All right, so I'm gonna explain what this whole SHSAT thing is. So it is a 3-hour test. It has a English language arts section and a math section. The ELA section has some revising editing questions that are a little bit of grammar, and also questions about like the quality of writing. So making passages like be rhetorically strong. And then there'll be reading comprehension. There's gonna be some passages. There's gonna be some graphs. There might be a poem in there. And then it's going to move into the math section. So there's going to be like some grading questions where they do you have to write your answer, and then a variety of topics. it's going to kind of go between algebra, geometry, statistics, maybe some, some number theories or something, on there. No, calculators not allowed, for any reason. Um, and the scale is one of the mysteries of the world, which is like each year they build their own scale and they don't really publicize it. It's just when they receive the reports they'll get, they'll get, what their scaled score is, but it's never even clear what the max or the min is. Like it seems to vary per year, and really it's just family sort of self-reporting. So the point where I say like you really can't worry about the scoring of the SHSAT is really, to go to Maria said, like, did you get into the school that you wanted, and did you get the score, and really kind of worrying about everything else, doesn't matter. But things are changing. Important one here is that, the SHSAT, which, try not to say the wrong acronym here, um, is moving to digital this fall. So it will be administered digitally. Students will still take it in school, so it's not an at-home option or anything like that. And there'll still be like or on demand. It still will be, at a date on a testing location. So the structure and content will remain the same. They'll still have 3 hours, to you can move around the section, and still the same number of questions. The big change is going to be, they're implementing some of these tech enhanced items, and we were kind of playing with some of those for, we went live here. But it's kind of like these questions are kind of using the digital format to be more creative. So it's not just a multiple choice question, or even like, hey, putting in like a number. It may be like manipulating, a table and adding information to a table, picking more than one right answer, like clicking on the grammar error in the sentence, grabbing like they might have a reading question where it's like, which of the following is mentioned as a cause of air pollution, and you have to, in the passage, and you have to select more than one answer. So this is all very, very new on there. There's not yet a practice test available, but there will be one in March. But they're saying that none of these changes will involve like the range of questions or like the depth of those. It's just the interface, and so, it doesn't mean that they're adding more math concepts or more grammar or anything like that. Um, uh, but they have not yet released a full, a version of it. But that'll happen in March. So, um, we'll be excited about that. And then for those that care about it, for this is, in 2026, so this would be, um I guess, a sixth grader now, would that the test will become adaptive like the SAT. And I don't know much about this yet. I know that it's been stated, but an adaptive test would be that how you do on early questions affect the questions you get later on. They would obviously have to take away that ability to move freely within the section. And I don't have any specifics on that. There's two ways to run an adaptive test. There is a, um, like line item adaptive, where you complete question one, and then how you do on question one tells you question two. And there's also what they call section adaptive, which is what the SAT is currently, where you complete a module and you can move within that module, and then you move on to the next module, and then you either get a harder or easier module depending on how you did on the first one. Um, I don't know what that will be. This is, still stay tuned, but, definitely, the digital winds are blowing here. So how do we get, in this, so the students can only take the eighth grade test once, and preparation is key. There's no, you don't, if a student does poorly on and bombs it or whatever, there's not a second opportunity on that. Like this is a one and done test, which is, is the highest stakes of any of the things we're going to talk about. Best thing is the film stuff. We're doing a free practice test in there, and I'll be candid. Like the practice test is not the digital version; it's the paper version, because there was no digital version for us to implement. Right. This was a, uh, learning new things before anything's are being scheduled. I still think it is useful because it is the question types and the range, and so, even though it's not going to have the messing around with like weird question types, it's still like it is the type of reading it ask type of math. So, but and if you're interested in that, we'll have a QR code later on. So students can move through the test, for this digital one, and the previous ones. So if students struggle with math, start there. Do what you do best first. I think that'll be really helpful for a lot of students. Um, so I would say that comparing all these different tests, the reading on the SHSAT is tough. Um, it's the passages aren't so bad, but they ask really complicated questions. It's a lot of what they call like craft and structure questions, and like or making like um, understanding like the purpose of like why did the author include this line, and then the answer choices are like long, like well developed, and so you really have to understand what's going on there. I think it's some of the toughest reading, honestly, of like any test, including SAT and ACT and stuff for high school and college admissions. Okay, so we're gonna run through all these independent school ones. So these are for um, uh, schools that are used um, in um, some schools are part of the other ones, and I guess I should speak on this. So, um, there's a lot of acronyms here, and we'll go over all the needs. What's the New York City market looking like these days for test optional, uh, test blind, or test required, those kind of things.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So, generally speaking, if you're applying to Catholic school, there's going to be a test that you have to take. But like you noted here, Catholic schools, some are more flexible than others in terms of the tests that you take. They might give you some options. There might be some overlap with a test that you're already taking for some other schools. For the independent schools, traditionally they don't really care as much anymore whether or not you take the ICs versus the SSAT. However, with COVID and immediately after COVID, we found more and more of the independent schools that were eliminating testing as a requirement, that were going test optional. Some have kept that, and some have reverted back to requiring a test. So it's a little bit unclear what's going to happen for this fall. They're in a typical era, you wouldn't really see very much change from year to year. But because the dynamic has been such that over the past couple of years, we're seeing some more independent schools that are deciding to go back to requiring a test. It wouldn't surprise me if some schools do continue to go in that direction, but I think it's also safe to say that it will continue to be a mixed bag where some independent schools will require tests and others won't. So, this time of year, especially in the spring, it's really interesting when independent schools offer admissions events, and many of them do. April and May, we're seeing some to start to trickle out already. You might get some hints about what's to come in the fall, and sometimes you'll get hints that gives you some useful information that may or may not already be on their websites in terms of their intentions for testing for the fall. So it's a little bit TBD, but that's all a long way of saying that it's probably going to be a mixed bag as well for the independent schools this year.
Yeah, I know that speaking for the college admissions, that yeah, the pendulum has swung back towards test required, especially for elite schools. Almost all the Ivy Leagues and a lot of like the big state schools are now requiring that. So I don't know how much of that's going to affect independent schools. And also, if you're considering like boarding options and stuff, the SSAT and IC are also very common for those if you're looking for um, any kind of schooling outside of New York City. Uh, all right, so we'll talk about the SSAT first. The SSAT has the most options, and it can get a little confusing. And so there's four ways you can take the SSAT, and you can take it quite a few times. So there's a monthly paper-based test at select locations. New York City will have plenty of those. They're usually the first or second Saturday of the month, starting in October. There is a paper-based flex and benchmark test. A benchmark test is when the school applies for it. So it's really if the school, if the school is a feeder school, they may do that and have one on campus. Then your student should definitely take it. The paper-based flex is literally you just schedule it with provider and then take that at your flexibility. But you can only do that once. And then you also can take a test at Prometric Center, which Prometric does all kinds of tests, a lot of like adult tests, grad school or testing for different professions and stuff. And you go in there and you take it on a computer, and you can do that twice. And there's also the SSAT at home, which is something that they push really strongly in terms of the pandemic. They're really rolling it back as of last year, or I guess this from this last current school year. They've now made it where you only can take it once, when there was a point where you could take it like 4 times a month. Um, on that way, but you can take that at home. I will say, candidly, that the SCT at home is shaky, and I wouldn't, um, I wouldn't put, like, I've had students get kicked out of testing for a dog barking in another room and stuff. So, I'm a little, I wouldn't say that I would put a lot of weight in the at home test. And honestly, in the fall they might actually discontinue it or something. I think that's, they haven't made their, next school year's testing thing, but the other ones are definitely going to be around. And there was some structure of this. There's an essay that's unscored. It's sent to the school. It's part of like a introduction slash unofficial psych eval on there. There's quantitative, which is math. There's reading comprehension. There's verbal, which includes synonyms and analogies. There's more math, and then there's like an experimental section. It's a pretty standard classic test in a lot of ways there. So the scoring there, the SAT is different because it is the only test we'll be talking about today that has a guessing penalty. And quite honestly, I think it's the only test that student will ever encounter in their middle school or high school career that has a guessing penalty. Guessing penalties are very old fashioned. And honestly, this is an old fashioned test on there. So the guessing penalty means that if a student gets a question wrong, they lose a quarter point off their raw score. And so learning how to answer strategically, and especially when you're dealing with vocabulary and maybe these are words that the student doesn't know at all, it's better to leave that blank than to guess blindly on there. So the reports will get percentiles, and scout scores. The Really just the percentiles of what matter. That's what schools will be using. So what's a good strategy for this? It is an old school IQ test. It is a dinosaur of a test. And so the good news about that is that it's easy to kind of conquer because it is like, there's just patterns you can learn on that test. Like it's a very coachable test, on there. I mean, one thing that it is fairly strong in ELA skills. There's I think that has the hardest verbal section of any of these tests, and the reading is no slouch. I would say that maybe the SHSAT is harder because of the questions they ask, but you're going to be dealing with some pretty old passages and poems on the SSAT, and certainly it's a difficult section in its own. The math is not terribly challenging for the upper level, because there are 3 levels for the SAT. And so I'm just talking about all these are the upper level if there are versions of this. That it does go into some algebra 1 concepts, but honestly, a student who's on like a honors track or equivalent, in 8th grade should have those skills. And one thing about this, you should certainly plan to test more than once for SSAT. There's a lot of options for that. And a lot of times students, the benefit of if you go the SSAT path versus the SHSAT path, is that you do have multiple options to do well on there. And then we got the ISE. So ISE has a couple different things. The at home is their platform. They have the Prometric. They also have paper-based at select locations. They don't have nationwide test dates, and so you have to look. And I was working with a student this fall, who was in northern New Jersey, and she had a hard time finding a place to take an ISE test. She couldn't find even they live close to New York City. She had to go up to upstate into Westchester to take the test from New Jersey, because there were no testing centers in New Jersey, and nothing in New York City proper. So I found that was pretty baffling, for the limited options on there for testing. But yeah, so she should be able to do it. But the other thing about it is that there's limited testing on here. So you take the test once per testing season. So there's a fall season that starts from August to November, and then it switches over to a winter season, December, March. So you can take a test once in fall, once in winter. You could also take it in spring and summer, but there's really no reason to do this. I think there's only way this would be if you was like a family moved late, or you were on a wait list for something, or the something where you were recruited athlete and you just needed to get in the ballpark or something to you get it. But like it's really not an option for most families. And so essentially you have two opportunities to take the ISEE. And it's whatever means you have. So you in fall you could take one of these options, and in winter you could take one of these options, but it's going to be two essentially. You also they do it, it's annoying. You can't take it in July because that's the end of the previous school year. So you can't go early for summer because that's gonna count as a seventh grade test, and that's actually at the middle level, and you can't apply it. So and also like a weird little quirk on
By
there.
the way, Matt, one thing really quickly is I also hear a lot from families for students who are taking the test with accommodations, whether on the basis of an IEP, an IESP, or a 504 plan.
Mhm.
It is, it seems to be even more difficult to schedule a
Sure.
testing appointment. So just word to the
Yeah.
wise.
Yeah, I will say that the ISE at home is they have incredible availability. It's almost every weekend, and at multiple times because there's students on the West Coast. So, honestly, you could like a lot of times you can start at noon or 1 p.m. or something because again, they're setting that up more for like a someone in Seattle or something. But um, you know, it's an open availability. All right, so IC structure is a little bit different than the SSAT, but there's a lot of similarities. It starts with verbal. That's going to be uh, synonyms and sense completions. It does not have the analogies, which is like this is to that. Then there's quantitative, which is going to have like a mix of kind of puzzly math, and then also these quantitative comparisons. Actually, they'll give you two values, which one's bigger, or are they the same, or do we not know? There's reading comprehension, and then I think its most unique thing is the math achievement, which it really pushes hard on math skills. And then it also ends with an essay it's untimed, or not untimed, ungraded. It is very much timed. Um, that is is sent along to the schools, and not a big concern. The ICC scoring is weird. So there's no guessing penalty. So certainly students should answer all questions. And that's true for I didn't think it said in the slide, but the SHSAT is also no guessing penalty. So definitely answer something. Though I don't know what some of those new computer ones, what you would do, how you would guess, but maybe that's kind of the point. Um, there's a really weird scaled score of 760, 940. I have no idea where they came up with that. That seems like very odd numbers. And there's percentiles, and then also a Stanine score. And a lot of schools are going to use the Stanine score because essentially Stanine score kind of lumps together percentiles. I know that it is not it's not like in tens. It's like to get a nine means I think it's 97th and above. Like it's very small piece on there. So you may see schools that they want like a six or above or something on there. You'll see more use of that. The SSAT doesn't provide stanines. All right, so I would say that the good thing about the IC is that the verbal and reading sections are pretty easy as these things go. They're very straightforward. The vocabulary is not very challenging. The reading is very like basic comprehension on there. The math is harder. The math for an eighth grader goes into trigonometry, matrices, and quadratics, things that very few eighth graders know. And for a student who's really looking to push that math score, it will involve learning at least the basics of some ideas that they have not seen before. Um, and so all these things that they're really asking, like, do you know what a trigonometry function is? Do you know how to manage a matrix? And so they're not like real in depth, but they're definitely um, testing, trying to show who is above and beyond there, hence the achievement. All right, and then we'll get into some of these the Catholic school tests, the HSPT, and it's usually given December or January. It is the cognitive skills, basic skills, and composites. So there's all these sub percentiles, and notice that they kind of go between different things. They're not just like math and ELA, right? The amount of questions is like daunting in the sense of like they have like in a verbal section, there like is an analogy, then a synonym, then an antonym, then a use case scenario, and like um or which word is not like an associative thing, right? Which of the word is not like the others. Um, and the timing is really, really fast. And it's like one of the most chaotic tests I think I've ever seen. I won't say that any of the questions are particularly hard, but you have to go fast. So we got these weird, kind of scoring bands on here, based on the different things, but this also kind of gives us our structure of, they do quantitative and mathematics, or they consider those differently. Language is going to have grammar. Verbals can be all kinds of wordplay, and then like a basic, like a normal reading section there. Um, so it's a wild test for sure. And then we have the tax here, which is, test for admissions at Catholic high school, and that's what it does. So it's online, so it is an at-home test. It offers in reading, written expression, and mathematics. Horrible pun there. It's not that hard of a test. I would say it is a test that is seeing if you are at eighth grade level, and certainly does not have any of the things that are really gonna push a student that you're gonna see on any of the other tests. This one is like this should be seen as like the kind of test of just like, are you at grade level? And I would not say that for the other tests. The tests are all the other ones are saying, are you above grade level? Or are you exceptional?
Matt, one real quick thing about the tax exam from an
Yes.
admission standpoint is it is the one test for non-public schools that's used as the basis for merit scholarships. So
Hmm.
it can make a big difference. I've seen some students who do really well and are offered some nice awards,
Awesome.
financial awards by these schools.
Yeah, thank you, Marisa. I appreciate the insight there. Okay, so let's talk about building a smart testing application timeline on here. And the great thing about it is we're hanging out in February. Is that, for everyone who's attending here, congratulations, you're on top of it. Like, for your rising eighth grader in the fall, like, because I'll tell you, I'm sure Maurice encounters this. I know like families that are not prepared, and it's October, uh, or even later. Especially for private school admissions, I see the family that the kid just takes the SSAT in like November, and they get the scores back and they freak out, and then they have like, how much during winter break how much tutoring can we cram in? All right. This is your slide here for SHSAT timeline there, I believe.
Yeah, no
Or is it
problem.
mine?
This might be
Kind of,
yours,
kind
Matt.
of. I think this is a mix, if I remember.
I mean,
Um,
I think I covered the registration piece. I mean, as far as
yeah,
registration is concerned, you won't be able to do anything until the fall of eighth grade. As Matt mentioned, you can take it as an option as a first-time ninth grader if you'd like. And these schools tend to offer open houses in the fall. They also offer sort of revisit types of open houses after offers go out in the spring. And as I was sort of alluding to before, you can expect to find at least as far as the public schools are concerned, this is one of the first sets of schools that you actually rank, the SHSAT schools, usually by mid-October.
mhm.
So again, you don't want that to be. I come across families every year who are sort of caught by surprise by that because they think they have until early December like they do the other public schools, but they don't. Um, yeah, that's what I'll say for this slide.
Great. Yeah, I think, well, that's important information for sure. All right, so I can talk about this one. All right, so the SATs, it starts taking in August for registration on those. The testing starts in October. Though you could take the at-home test earlier, though I don't know why you would choose that. Um, and you know, most schools won't accept pass the January test, though there are some exceptions of like, you've placed your application and then you take the February test, and you're basically going to send that February test no matter what. I have seen, though, that is like the worst case scenario, but not like, it's not the most dire thing. So summer's a great time to get going on this. There's like, you got to learn vocab for this SSAT test, and so the earlier you can start that process, the better that's going to be. And then plan to test multiple times, on there. And that there is I would save the at home for a last minute, even though I know it is kind of a shaky test, or the flex test. If I see a lot of families in like winter break, are doing that, and scheduling that to just have another option for sure. And then the ICE timeline is really fixed. You need to take the test in the fall timeline when it is offered um, on there. It starts on August 1st. And if you're doing an ICE thing, I strongly recommend logging on August 1st to find a testing location because they're going to fill up. As I said, a student last year that was not able to find one in New York City, and she did go on August 1st. Like it was not they were on top of it. Be aware of that. The summer's a great time to take a practice test on there, and then know that like depending on math, may need to start reviewing math concepts beyond what you would typically see in eighth grade. So for the other two, I can kind of combine them, like, like what your school wants, like the schools you're applying to on there. So that there's not a lot of materials for any of these tests. There's like, uh, there's some questionable stuff out there, on that. But I mean, you can see like some samples of question types on there. So the tax handbook is useful for that. And to get that, the registration late August, and then typically it's in early November there. And the HSPT, like their website is like Web 1.0, like um, and I think it has a dancing hamster in the corner. I mean, it's it doesn't feel like professional. So uh, the resources there are real limited, unfortunately, on there, and like so hence the to be determined, like that's pretty legit on that test. All right, Rich, we'll talk about these application timelines.
Yeah, no problem. And by the way, if you're taking a test multiple times, there can be some strategy involved when it comes to the point when you get your results back. You don't have to report the schools that you want to send the results to until after you get the results back. So those are a lot of conversations that I have with families in terms of like what strategy makes sense, whether or not to submit a score to a test optional school, those kinds of things. As far as applications are concerned, so this is sort of the phase of the process that I like to call the application prep phase. So when I'm working with seventh grade families right now, we're laying the foundation for what's to come later. We're doing a lot of prep work, a lot of like getting a head start to prepare for some of the execution that comes later. So identifying schools and thinking about coursework and laying the foundation for essay work and interviews and those kinds of things. So the prep phase. But what happens in late August to early September is you'll find the vast majority of independent schools release their applications. Now, that doesn't mean you can't go onto their websites now and get a pretty good sense of what their application components tend to look like, because you can. But most schools that use, and we're talking about independent schools, most independent schools use a system, a common application system called Ravenna. Most schools will not officially release all of their application components and official deadlines in Ravenna until the fall. So if for some reason you go to their website and they say, okay, go to Ravenna and set up an account, you're not going to see very much in there yet. But on their websites, they'll give you a pretty good sense of what to expect. In late September, early October, usually, the DOE will launch the public application process. So what that means is you'll be able to log into your MySchools account for the first time. And even if you've had a MySchools account before, you can't do anything until the fall, at which point you can actually activate your child for next year's high school application process. And that also coincides with the time at which you can start to register for the specialized high schools. Later in the fall, you will encounter obviously a lot of deadlines, financial aid deadlines for independent schools, which usually happen in late November, December, depending upon the school, sometimes early January, and the application deadlines in December for both public schools and independent schools. And jumping ahead to the spring, this is what eighth graders are going through right now. They just got their independent school results last week. Public results are coming out next week, including the specialized high schools. And there can be some strategy there as well. I mean, these are some conversations I'm having with families now about how to deal with wait lists. And, what do I do if I got my independent school offer, but I'm waiting for my public school offer, and these kinds of things, we can certainly help with when the time comes.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely we're talking about next fall, but really there's I think it's important to think of what families are going on right now for sure. All right, you got a checklist here?
Application checklist, yes. So these are, when I mentioned a couple of minutes ago about some of the things that I'm working with seventh grade families on. So briefly, we're starting to get a little bit more clarity with families on what broad types of schools make sense for them. Does it make sense to look at independent schools? Do they want to look at public schools? Like, which broad categories make sense for them based on their preferences and their child's learning style and how they've thrived in their current middle school, et cetera, et cetera. So that's sort of the top of the funnel, so to speak. Then, depending upon which of these major paths they go down, that will tend to dictate next steps in terms of what do I need to prepare for? Do I need to think about testing? Do I need to think about essays? Do I need to think about, should I go to some spring school visits, which is a really good use of time. I think one of the most valuable uses of time in the spring of seventh grade. And that includes, by the way, going to some official admissions events that are held by independent schools. There are a couple of public schools that hold spring events in seventh grade, not too many though. The vast majority of them have events in eighth grade, but that doesn't necessarily stop you from getting out to public school performance, a drama, a theater production, a musical production, these kinds of things that are open to the public. There are ways to see schools aside from just going to an official admissions event. But even if, as far as the independent schools go, even if you're not quite certain that you're going to apply to independent schools, there was a family I met with this morning. I'm encouraging them to go see some independent schools in the spring just to get their feet wet, to see what these events are like. And in some cases, you don't know what you don't know, right? So it gives you a chance to get a little bit more clarity on what types of schools make sense for you and what you don't like as much as what you do like. I often also encourage students to make note of really strong work samples that you produce, whether it's an essay or an analytical project. It is not terribly uncommon for some schools to ask for samples of work, graded work samples, when it comes to these applications in the fall of eighth grade. So if you happen to start gathering copies of 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pieces of work over the course of seventh grade, the latter part of seventh grade, that's also a worthwhile exercise. To start beginning jotting down names to develop a robust preliminary list of schools, even if it's just, a good place to start is just a name that you heard from a neighbor or a friend. Jot down that name, maybe look it up, learn a little bit more about that school. Whether it's going on to inside schools for the public schools or going on to private school websites, or just talking to people, talking to your friends or neighbors. Be conscious of seventh grade academics, right? For public schools, final seventh grade course marks matter a lot for many programs. And when it comes to applying to independent schools, they're going to look at not only seventh grade transcripts, but the beginning of eighth grade. Catholic schools also, their Catholic schools actually look at sixth, seventh, and eighth. So being conscious of that. There are some students, student I was talking to yesterday that is on the cusp of making the what a lot of people refer to as the top tier for public screen programs, right at the cusp, has a very good chance. And without knowing what that threshold typically is, it can make a difference. Just knowing what the threshold has been can really make a difference in terms of working towards that goal by the end of the school year. Summer plans. I'm working with a lot of families on developing what summer plans make sense. If because it can really make a difference when it comes to your applications and set you apart. And getting organized. I mean, applying to high school, particularly in New York City, is a really daunting process, but you want to really be organized. It's very hard to go through this without having an admissions calendar, a binder, a chart where you're tracking your progress. Another family I met with today, I was encouraging the student, this seventh grade student, I was encouraging them to set up their own high school admissions calendar. to start blocking off a little bit of time a week for some research. And I was encouraging her to, to her credit, she's already starting to do some research, but she wasn't writing anything down. So I gave her a little template she could use. She's starting to jot down some notes because this is all going to come in handy later on, right? It's going to actually save her some time later on. So for students, some students are not, they don't want to be involved. They're not quite ready yet, and that's okay. But for students who are starting to dip their feet in the water of this preparation, I think it's really important for them to know that the work they're doing now is going to pay off later. And it's really important for them to get their thoughts and their impressions down on paper, because they're going to lose it. Within days, you lose 99% of what you hear. So with that, I think I'm going to turn it back to Matt.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Yeah. And it's that we will have a recording of this of this presentation to that end there. So I want to work through tip 3 here of how do you prep strategically for these admissions tests. And this is geared towards the student who is may have to look at multiple exams here. So there is some overlap in these things. And so all of the ELA content on they're going to have contemporary passage based reading, right? So that's everything. These two have poetry and older narratives. These three have verbal. So this is straight testing of vocabulary. I mean, all these tests will have like maybe vocab and context, like what does this word mean in this passage? But these are like questions specifically, either a synonym or an analogy or a sense completion, like that. And then some of them have grammar. So it's not a big concern in the SHSAT, but it does show up in these tests. Does not show up in SSAT or ISEE. And then only the SSAT and ISEE have those essays, right? So if you're kind of thinking about like going through these as if you're taking 2 or 3 of these tests, what are some things that are relevant on there? And then for math content, a lot of overlap here, right? Because the thing of arithmetic skills, which is fractions and percentages and that kind of thing. And then this is going to be like algebra 1 skills primarily. And then so there's some basic geometry, and then like easy statistics, mean, median, mode, that kind of stuff. And so all this have that in some capacity. The only difference is that some of them have the spatial reasoning, which is like understanding like if you rotate shapes, what happens. And then IC is kind of special because it has that those advanced topics, which might be trigonometry or so on. And so there's a lot of math that is the same, right, on these tests. So what's a good first good step? Take a practice test for whatever these and establish a baseline. See how timing is and see where which sections are the strongest or weakest, and that will help. And you see like how much studying does the student need to do. Do not assume that your student is going to do great because they have A's. These tests are different than your classroom instruction, and some of them don't align well with a lot of middle school standards. Create a testing plan. We've talked about this previously, but know when you're testing. Some of those it's very defined. Some of them are not, right? SHSAT, there will be a date. SSAT, you can be really flexible. IC, you have to think about the 2 times, right? You can test. And then pace out your prep. None of these tests are great for cramming. Like that's being slow and steady, especially for vocab for the math. It's really important to kind of like make that a weekly activity for over a period of weeks and really for months. It's going to go a lot better than trying to cram last minute. And I think it's important to talk about testing that we mentioned this earlier in there. With the SHSAT, it has so much pressure on students because it is an all or nothing test. And so, it's okay to acknowledge this and know that it is stressful for your student. And, knowing how to talk through and reduce anxiety is important. And then I think also the more exposure you have the test, the less scary it is. I know there's going to be quite a few students, at these testing locations that are just like their parents that told them to show up and they're going in blind, right? And so, you don't want your student to be in that that experience and stuff. All right. Tip 4 is you, Maurice.
Yeah, and I think it's a great segue from the stress, because I think what also can be helpful is strengthening your application beyond test scores, and also what I think is tip number 5, which we'll get to in a moment.
Mhm.
But so beyond test scores, so testing is not, with the possible exception of the SHSAT, schools are looking at other things, whether it's work samples and essays and interviews, and for audition programs that are looking at auditions, course marks, activities outside of the classroom. I was, I sound like a broken record, but the family that I was speaking with today about the fact that there's, this is like applying to elite colleges in some respects, in that, for you can have a lot of admissible students for a particular school with good grades and top test scores. But what can also make a difference is how you're showing your leadership, how you're getting involved outside of the classroom, how you're making a difference in the world. And it doesn't necessarily mean you have to be curing cancer, right? I mean, it could be the simplest thing. It's more about quality than quantity. But the schools are going to look for your commitment to whatever your interests are, whatever your passions are. And and again, to think about your summer, what is your summer going to look like? I love it when a student is delving deeper into something that they're already interested in as a way to demonstrate their commitment, and also trying something new. A lot of admissions folks, when I used to interview a lot of students as an admissions officer, I love it when students demonstrate that they're willing to take a risk, that they're willing to try new things, that they're willing to experiment. And you're not always going to like what you're doing, but that's okay. The summer is also a great time to get a head start on anticipated writing exercises and interview exercises. This is some of the work that I do with students over the summer. You can get a head start on these things, as well as for parents. There are some parents that I'm working with right now to already get ready for some of the writing that they're going to have to do. Particularly for the independent school applications, it is tedious for students and for writing. But there are ways to start to lay the groundwork for these kinds of things and strengthen your application beyond the test scores. I think we're ready for the next slide, Matt.
Yeah, and
And I think this is also related to managing stress, right? Keeping your options open, casting a wide net. I think families tend to get sick of hearing me say this, but this is a really good time, particularly for 7th grade families, to explore what I mentioned before, which is that looking broadly at what types of schools might make sense, and considering more than just putting all your eggs in one basket. So, and I'll tell you a story that I think illustrates this point really well. There was a family that I was working with about a month ago that, for a variety of reasons, did not submit a public application. They put all their eggs in the independent school basket. And for reasons that I won't get into tonight, it didn't work out. And this past month, they were wondering what they could do on the public school front, much beyond the deadline. And I can tell you that if this, not to sound like I'm patting myself on the back, but if this was a family that was working with me in the fall, I would have gotten them to submit a public application, if for no other reason, as a backup. But they did not do that. And they were scrambling around looking at the last minute because all of a sudden they didn't have this independent school option. So casting a wide net, I can't tell you how important it is. And all these families that are getting their results now, even before the public school offers come out, it feels so good for them to know that they have options. And yes, we'll see what they may prefer. Public schools, they may be really anxious to get their results next week, but they have something in their back pocket. It's a really, really good place to be. And consider some spring school events. I don't want to be too repetitive with what I mentioned a few minutes ago, but get out there, just get out there, even if it's going to 2 or 3 different kinds of schools, just to see what these events are like, just to get a taste for what the landscape is like. And it is not too early as a 7th grade family to start jotting down your preliminary list, using the resources that we've talked about tonight. And finally, my last point on the slide is that By the end of seventh grade, you should know who your counselor is at your school, who helps families navigate the high school applications. And we work with many of them on our team. We know who many of them are. And of course, we're happy to talk to you. But your first point of contact should be your school counselor for these applications. So by the end of seventh grade, at the very least, you should know who your counselor is. And some of them are conducting high school information sessions over the next couple months. And I know that because I'm doing a lot of them with those schools. Ask them. It's a good opportunity if you don't already know them to ask who your high school high school placement counselor is, or ex-mission counselor, whatever your school calls them, and ask them if they're having a spring event. And because most schools do, and ask them what kind of support, what does support look like for families in your middle school? Because it's a good time to start anticipating that and building your team and making sure that you're going to have the right support over the long term. That's all on the slide now.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're gonna start finishing up here. We have a Q&A if you have any questions on there. And I believe we should be launching a quick little finishing poll here. But Rich, you want to tell them about your slide and the services you offer?
Of course, I'll do this real quick, Matt. So we do not do what Apple Root does. So they have their expertise. We help families through navigate the admissions process. So we don't do test prep, we're not tutors. But if you're interested in how we can help you with the application process, everything from picking out schools to filling out applications to essays and interviews and everything involved with the exception of test prep, happy to talk to you. We always give a 15-minute complimentary phone call to answer some questions and see if we can, we're a good fit for your family. And if you're interested, if your school community, your PTA is interested in having us come talk, this is a good time to reach out because we're doing a lot of these talks over the spring. So happy to talk to you if you just want to reach out and chat. Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, appreciate your time, Bruce. And so things we're doing. So we have this practice test here. Then again, is they going to be the classic version on there, but you will get a detailed score report, and and see where get feedback you're not going to get from a regular test. The QR code that'll take you right to the sign up thing day on there. There's also, if we do tutoring for all these things, for on the test prep side of things. So we have work with a one-on-one person for any of these tests, or like a combo of those. We also, if you click on there, if you want to take an SSAT mock, we have those as well. But I would go the one on the right there, because they'll talk to program director and they'll get you set up with that. And so we can get it personalized for you. So we got those. And then we have a little bit of time for Q&A. I did want to address a thing that's come up. And if you have any questions on there, there's a Q&A chat on there. But one of the things that is in flux is that the company that owns the SSAT, which is EMA, that also does like a kind of a generic admissions, like kind of like the Common App for independent schools. And then the ISEE is owned by ERB. That they do a lot of grade level testing for independent schools. So they're in the process of merging, and it's been announced. But there's not been any indication that one test is going away or a new test is springing forth. I mean, it's not impossible for that to happen by this fall, but I think it's unlikely. And I wish I knew more, because they've been radio silent since December about providing fresh releases. But that is definitely a thing as well. And I wanted to just ask Marissa about so for the SHSAT, like if with you have to choose the schools ahead of time, and I know that previously the kids had to bubble it, which always like made me super nervous. So I was sending a student in, be like, oh, are they gonna remember? Is there any is it a bad idea to like select them all and rank them, or like I know that there's no way obviously you just say like it's Stuyvesant or bust, and then and maybe that's just the case for that family. But like, what is there a sweet spot for like how many you apply to?
It's a great question, Matt. And honestly, there's no harm, the more the better, right? Because you're taking the test anyway. As long as you are getting the ranking right. And you're right about the bubbling. The bubbling always got me nervous. And I can't tell you how many families, when I was at the DOE, how many families wanted to change their choices of schools or their ranking
Mm,
after the student filled them out on test day by bubbling in their sheets.
yeah,
But that's much more a thing of the past because
thankfully.
families are more in control of that. Not that families don't want to change their minds still, but it happens much less. But uh, the short answer is the more the better. Just rank them in true preference order. Please don't play games. Um, in other words, don't rank based on your anticipated test score or some other factor. You should be ranking in true preference order. You're not penalized just because you put something second. In other words, because if I put Brooklyn Tech second, does that mean I'm not going to get in because all the seats are going to be gone at Brooklyn Tech by the time the algorithm gets down to my second choice if I don't get in my first choice? No, it doesn't work like that. So we could talk for an hour just about how the matching process works, but at
Sure.
the end of the day, rank in true preference order. The more the better that you're willing to consider. Um, Now, if you are never going to go to Staten Island Tech, if you're 2 hours away from Staten Island Tech,
Right.
does it make sense to apply there? No. But I also sometimes get frustrated when a student is taking the SHSAT and they only list Stuyvesant, right? Why do that? If you don't get into Stuyvesant, you're not giving yourself a chance of getting into any other specialized high school. And again, it's nice to have some options.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense there. Yeah, and certainly considering commute, they're it's all over the boroughs for
That's
sure.
right.
Yeah. All right. Well, Maurice, thank you so much. We're at the top of the hour here. Appreciate everyone for watching this and good luck.
Always a pleasure, Matt. Thank you.
All right. Have
Thank
a
you,
great night.
everyone.